title of the chapter is Climate Change Policy under Paris Agreement, Can They Be Fulfilled? This is a joint chapter with Indra Overland and Roman Vakulchuk. So the chapter is about how likely Central Asian countries are to fulfill their climate pledges under the Paris Agreement. So as we know, the Central Asian countries will be affected a lot by climate change, mostly negatively. And within the international climate agreement, Central Asian governments promised to do a number of reforms related to decarbonization in different sectors of the economy. So we are looking at the historical trends, how the emission intensities, for example, look like in these countries. What the second is about national policies, what the national policies tell, how they are relevant to the climate pledges. Do they also include the climate policy as one of the central policy features? And then at the end, we also compare these two factors, historical trends and national policies, with nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Our results suggest that these countries have strong historical legacy based, which they inherited from Soviet Union, which is lots of energy intensive and fossil fuel based economies. Another finding that their national policies are not very relevant to the announced national climate goals. And despite being one region, single region, and impacted more or less on the same level, they pursue different climate policies and they also use different methods to achieve this. As a result, we can state that despite, in general, all the analyzed countries, despite the high impact of climate change and also despite the mostly ambitious climate goals, most likely the goals will not be achieved. And this will require, in order to achieve the proposed climate goals, they will need to make more ambitious and more significant structural reforms in the energy sector, in the industrial policies.
As is shown in the book, the Central Asian countries are among the most vulnerable in the world to the effects of climate change. It's important, therefore, that states and societies in Central Asia learn to stand up to the impact of climate change. The concept of resilience is well placed to capture this, as it focuses on the extent to which a state or society can mitigate or adapt to crises. The governments of Central Asian countries are all actively involved in dealing with climate change. In their efforts, they receive direct support from UN agencies, international donors, and financial organizations, which are all increasingly promoting the notion of resilience as an essential way to be prepared for climate change. However, as the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed, most governments in Central Asia are actually not ready to deal with a crisis of such magnitude. The authorities of the Central Asian countries are not capable and/or not willing to take the necessary measures to sufficiently adapt to climate change and mitigate its consequences. Therefore, my chapter draws on post-development thinking to argue that resilience strategies that involve the sharing of responsibilities among individuals and among communities is more likely to increase the ability of the Central Asian countries to stand up to the impact of climate change. Post-development thinking emphasizes the value of self-reliance, which is linked to the notion that people are the agents of their own change and should act based on their local knowledge about what is good for them. The COVID-19 crisis has revealed that civil society and community-based initiatives across Central Asia have been instrumental in addressing the direct implications of the pandemic. Also, when it comes to standing up to the effects of climate change, there are indications that local civil society actors in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan are playing an important role by mobilizing resources to take local climate and environmental measures based on their awareness of locally attuned knowledge and skills. In my chapter, I illustrate how homegrown forms of self-governance and self-organizations in the mountainous areas of Central Asia are already acting in function of resilience building to climate change. Central Asian societies have a strong tradition of homegrown solidarity movements and locally embedded practices of self-reliance. This is why I argue that national governments in Central Asia, as well as major international donors like the EU and the World Bank, should help boost societal resilience to climate change in Central Asia by supporting the ability of local societal actors to self-organize and to draw on their own local strengths and own knowledge of available resources and infrastructure.